friends, and fellow citizens. This, our 9th anniversary, sees a very different Singapore and the prospect of an entirely different world since the quadrupling in the price of oil January this year, and the growing double-digit inflation rates in Europe, in Japan, and even in America. And alas, in Singapore too. Last year, in money terms, we made 23%, but half of it, 11.5% plus, was inflation. So in 1972 prices, we only made 11.5%. The first 6 months of this year, 74, we have made 6.75% after adjusting for inflation. You know, we were hoping for 12%. But let me give you a broad picture of how the OECD in Paris, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is an association of some 25 advanced countries, their balance sheet for the first 6 months of this year for 7 major industrial countries: Canada, US, Japan, France, Germany, Italy, Britain. And for the first 6 months, the GNP, or gross national product, for these 7 countries, they, compared to the first 6 months of 1973, showed a minus 1.5%, minus 1.5%. It's not the same for each country. Canada had a plus 6%, US minus 2.75%, Japan minus 6.5%, France plus 4.75%, Germany plus 2%, but the lowest inflation rates in all the developed countries. Italy plus 2.5%, Britain minus 6%. So when they do the sum total and say minus 1.5%, I think we ought to be relieved that we made 6.75%. Now their predictions, the OECD predictions for the second half of 1974 compared to the second half of 73. They say, with the oil embargo lifted and judging or projecting from the policies the major countries are pursuing, there will be a growth of plus 2.75% for all countries, for all the 7, from a minus 1.5% to a plus 2.75%. Now, if, and I say this is a big if this prediction is correct, then of course we will get the multiplier benefits and we will make more than 6.75% for the second half. I have some reservations because you have seen what the new American president has said. He is going to fight inflation. And he said to the American people, vote not for Democrats or Republicans, doesn't matter, he says. He says, vote for those who are going to support anti-inflation policies, not free spending policies, which means a tight squeeze on liquidity, which means you don't give such easy credits. The American economy is the world's largest. The GNP is over $1,000 billion, or American $1 trillion. So between them and the Germans, who are also anti-inflation, squeezing credit, I think we are going to have an anti-inflation emphasis in the next few months. And then perhaps if inflation is brought under control by next year, the OECD estimates may be right. They say 3.75% plus growth for the 7 big countries for the whole of 75. Now, this has repercussions for all countries. You get booming economies, they demand more raw materials, more steel, more copper, more zinc, more rubber, more palm oil. When they slow down, they want less iron ore, less copper, even less crude oil. People are now calculating that there's a surplus of production over consumption of about somewhere between 3 to 4 billion barrels a day, 10%. All the tanks, storage tanks, are filled up because everybody is slowing down to fight inflation. And so the Australians are getting less. They were booming last year. They are getting less now for the iron ore and the other minerals. And you will see the Malaysians have advised their rubber growers to hold back 10% of their rubber production in order not to let the price go down. But between $2 plus per kilo, which is what it was, is now $1.65, $1.64. And it has a multiplier effect. The whole world is interlocked, which means unless we take tough measures, we discipline ourselves, then we'll get roaring inflation and we'll run through our reserves. And so although we gave everybody 40%, $40 plus 6% or 10%, depending on whether they got an increase this year or not, we upped the CPF rates. I know there'll be grumbles. People like to have money now in their pockets to spend. But that's bad for the economy and that's bad for you. The price of your flats are going to go up. Price of cement goes up. Steel goes up because they use electricity. They are what is called energy-intensive products. And roughly speaking, the price of buildings, materials, and labor have gone up 30% compared to last year. So you will need more savings in the CPF to buy your flat. And don't forget, we are also paying higher interest rates on all CPF monies, which means the Housing Board now borrows at a much higher rate. You get, on your CPF, 6.5% on old and new deposits. Housing Board has been borrowing at low rates. Now, in order to make that 6.5%, Housing Board will have to pay much higher rates, and there's an argument now how much higher it must be. There's no way you can't have more interest and have cheaper houses. It's not possible. Perhaps it is fairer to have higher interest rates, more in line with the market, and higher prices. Now, people, particularly foreigners, in their newspapers say, we are an authoritarian lot, because we are prepared to discipline ourselves. See, when you read newspapers, there's a style about writing articles as there is with clothes. The West sets the style. So every year they change to make you buy new clothes, throw away all your good old ones. They make the tie broader. They make the lapels broader. They make the trousers flat. They make the boys wear high heels with platforms. That's called the consumer society. Buy now, pay later. If you can't pay, never mind, borrow. Keep on borrowing, keep on paying. Some of these things we can't altogether avoid because we've got into that development track. So you see it in the cinemas, you see it on television, you see it in the magazines, the glossy pictures. But just sit back and think. That's meant for Americans whose per capita income is nearly $8,000 per person per annum, going up perhaps with the inflation to $10,000 per capita per annum. Ours is not. We are just starting at a very low baseline, so just save. That's for the developed, wealthy, affluent. And now let me go to the other extreme, the poor. You've read about Bangladesh, famine, floods. Well, when we discipline ourselves, the Western journalists say authoritarian government, dictatorial, no freedom. When Bangladesh gets into trouble, let me read to you the kind of sympathy they show Bangladesh. I'm reading from a very reputable newspaper called the London Times of the 14th of August. And they signed themselves. Now, Mr. Nicholas Ashford, he writes, Bangladesh lives continuously on the brink of disaster, and it is hardly surprising that many foreign aid officials have become fatalistic. Some believe Bangladesh can never become economically viable and will always have to be supported by massive injections of foreign assistance. Even optimists expect that the country will require sustained large-scale aid for many, many years. And self-sufficiency will only be possible if the high population growth rate can be curbed. See, when you can't put your house in order, they say, well, there you are. Hopeless case, non-viable. No, all the sympathy you get are just words. Another correspondent, same newspaper, 3 articles on a human tragedy, and it says, Michael Hornsby from Dhaka. He's more sympathetic because he's right there on the spot. So far, the only international response to the Bangladesh government's appeal for help has been a trifling contribution of $20,000 US, of course, from the United Nations Disaster Relief Office in Dhaka and an aircraft load of supplies from Britain. Anywhere between 60 million, I don't know, 60, 70 million. They haven't taken a census for some time. There's been a war. Many have died, but definitely not less than 55 million people. 70,000 square miles. And the ending is, Michael Hornsby from Dhaka, there is probably also a feeling that the floods do not represent a compelling case for a special international relief effort, inasmuch as they are an annual phenomenon with which Bangladesh must learn to cope with its own resources if it is to be a viable country. If it is to be a viable country, this is an annual phenomenon, you cope. Well, there's a moral in all this for us, isn't there? If we don't cope with our problems, that's the sympathy we'll get. And even as we are coping with our problems, you know the rumors that go out. Singapore is not viable. Mind you, it's a honk. I don't blame them. They try. No hinterland, no oil. Viability, as you have seen, 70,000 square miles, 55 million people. And the conclusion, Michael Hornsby from Dhaka writes is, must learn to cope with its own resources if it is to be viable. And I think that's the first lesson. We learn to cope with our problems. The acid test is whether at the end of the day we have solved our problems. You can multiply Singapore 10 times over, but you multiply the population 15 times over, and I say we are worse off than we were. We are now. We have given to us this small island, but a very valuable piece of real estate, the most valuable per square meter. We are going metric now, so per square meter, anywhere in this part of the world. And it's because of the infrastructure, its position, its infrastructure, and its people. That's the biggest human resource that we can have ever asked for. willing to try, willing to work, willing to make that extra effort. And it does not matter if people spread rumors and say, you know, it's utter and complete madness, some of these rumors. But when I had a meeting with the press recently to go through the figures with them, and they asked me at the end of it all, you know, quite anxiously, says, tomorrow, National Day speech, are you really going to resign? You're going to announce your resignation? You've heard the others. I'm not wanting to be a rumor monger, but this has gone too far around. You might as well, if you haven't heard it, well, you'll hear it. A big split in the cabinet, big row between Dr. Goh and me. I stand in the way of re-merger. Singapore is not viable. All the time, the direction is your confidence. That's the target. Your morale, your confidence. If they shake that morale, that confidence, I'm glad to know that they believe that if I'm going to resign, that will shake confidence. It's a great compliment to me, in which case I shall disappoint them, and I intend to stay and see my job through. But we have other problems. And we have got to face them. The world that we have known up till now is changing rapidly. The international background is changing. Of 1973, Paris peace talks, withdrawal of the Americans from Vietnam. That's February. August, no bombing of Cambodia. October, change of government in Thailand. This year, before the year is out, there's going to be the People's Republic of China's embassy in Kuala Lumpur. Well, it's only a matter of time that the People's Republic of China will be represented in all of Southeast Asia. And we should not make the mistake of confusing the PRC, People's Republic of China, with the CPM, the Communist Party of Malaya, as they call themselves. Peninsular Malaya, together with Singapore. They demonstrated it quite clearly. The PRC may, for their own national interests, have government-to-government correct relations, G to G. But the local Communist Party is a separate matter. Now, we have made our position clear. When our neighbors, Malaysia, our immediate neighbors, Malaysia, Indonesia, have restored diplomatic relations, we will have diplomatic relations. Just like China, we calculate what is in our interest. And our interest is best served by not taking first or second place. There are many reasons. First, the long-standing suspicion that we are 75+%, actually 78% by the 1970 census, ethnic Chinese. Now, American scholars, Australian scholars, British scholars, they call us overseas Chinese. No, that's a very subtle difference in term. They don't call Australians or New Zealanders overseas British. They're Australians, they're New Zealanders. But they call us overseas Chinese, you see. Yes, I think that's a subconscious question mark. When I tell them I am a Singaporean, I think sometimes they say, yes, perhaps. I am, you are, they concede that. But they want to know whether the 78% minus me are Singaporeans. I'm convinced that the majority, overwhelming majority, are. Otherwise, they would not have voted for this government so decisively in '68 and again in '72. But there is no harm in letting others take first and second places. There's no question of recognition. We recognize China, China recognizes us. We carry a dialogue in the UN, wherever they are represented, in London, Tokyo, if we like, in Hong Kong. In Singapore, there are two banks. The Bank of China and the Guangdong Provincial Bank are owned by the government of the PRC and 3 insurance companies. No problems about trade. In fact, you know that they buy very little and we buy a lot. The balance of trade is immensely in their favor. Of course, we don't object to that so long as overall we buy and sell and there is a credit balance. You can watch you have watched the ping pong team, you have watched the badminton. I think Mr. Barker is going to arrange for you to watch the PRC football team. Name it and you'll have it. Except, of course, some forms of opera, which are now not in vogue or not in fashion in the People's Republic of China. The ultimate question that we must measure against every policy is this in our interest? As of now, I say no. And I am prepared to say that the majority of the people will support this. When the time comes and it is in our interest, we will do so. The crux of our problem is not lack of a huge hinterland, oil, mineral resources. be nice if we could have those things. Saves us from working very hard. But that is not for us. We've got to remain trim, hardworking, organized. Nature, geography, and history decided that for us. And what is the answer? Lies within ourselves. The capacity to turn a people of largely immigrant stock into a people with enough cohesiveness, with a national identity of their own, to be able to pursue their national interests regardless of outside pressures. And we are going to have these outside pressures. We've had them, whether it's from you. If I go to India, you know, I'm seen shaking hands with President Giri or Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Some Indians are happier. I have no doubts that if I were to take a picture with the leaders of the PRC, there will be temporary euphoria amongst a section of the people. But look, is it in our interest? When it is, yes. But without that, we are able to establish that we govern Singapore in the interest of all Singaporeans, regardless of race, language, or religion. And we are prepared to be equally tough. You know what happened in '69. We were tough on the Chinese gangsters who were trying to start off a counter riot here. And I specifically spoke in Malay just now about problems of, or supposed problems that have been raised over and discussed in the Malay press about their freedom of religion and so on. And in fact, it's absurd, because far from wanting to discourage religion, we believe that those with religion, if they believe it, if they have faith in their God and His commandments, at least they will be more resistant to the permissiveness of contemporary society. All the drug takings, all the amoral and immoral behavior, which is a result of too rapid a change in society. My last comment this evening is that you are not going to hear the last of the rumors. You're going to hear much more. And always ask yourself, what's this aimed at? To shake your confidence. Who benefits if Singapore is shaken? Not Singaporeans. And what proximity to truth? And Singapore must grow up in sophistication, in the ability to take things in their stride. Never get carried away with too much success. Never be downcast when you haven't made the targets you aimed for, because intervening circumstances have changed the situation. But there's one fundamental quality we have which nothing can change, and that's the verve, the vitality, the drive in a people. Call it what you will, the DNA, double helix, whatever you like to call it, is in us. And that is the most precious asset that we've got. And that can only be used if there is organization, there is cohesion, there is unity of purpose and objective between government, people, between unions and employers. And let me end up by another quote from the London Times. This is the 13th of August, and the writer is Michael Lipton, Professorial Fellow of the Institute of Development Studies, Sussex. He said, 3 years ago, the government of Ceylon invited the International Labour Office, ILO, to send a team to advise on Ceylon's development problems. As a member of that team, I'm struck by an uncanny similarity between Ceylon's problems in 1971 and Britain's in 1974. In both cases, political parties had competed to offer welfare guarantees of consumer welfare without creating sufficient productive capacity to meet them. In both cases, governments were driven to borrow abroad at ever-rising interest rates in a desperate attempt to sustain living standards. Ceylon had the excuse of poverty. Britain has not. Now, we may have the excuse of semi-poverty, but let's not get into that syndrome. And if people say that balancing our budget, refusing to go along with the fads and fancies of the contemporary permissive societies of the West, if that is authoritarianism, well, so be it. I'm solvent. Singapore's solvent. And I hope to meet you next year, perhaps plus maybe if what the OECD says is true, that the 7 major countries will grow by 3.75%, then we'll grow by 9, 10, 11%. Thank you.